All right, guys, how's it going? So today we're going to be talking about relative clauses. And just like the word implies, relative, just like your relative or your Uncle Bill, is related to you. Relative clauses work in a similar way. Let's take a second to look at this example. That's the man who bought our house. That's the man is the main clause. Who bought our house is the relative clause. So when we say who bought our house, that alone is not a sentence, but is giving more information about the man. So if I were to say, here are the books that you wanted, the phrase that you wanted, again, gives more information about the books, implying that they were wanted. Now, each of these sentences in this example contain a main clause and a relative clause. But notice here in the relative clauses, in English, we use the words who and that. Now, who and that are important. Those are called relative pronouns. So it's a pronoun. What is a pronoun? It's kind of like if you were at a football game and you were pro one side of that football game. That means that you were for them, okay? You are, in a sense, an extension of that football team. Similarly, that word, der, die, or das, is an extension of the actual noun that it's portraying. So it's kind of like it's representing. So the next thing that we're going to look at is that English has two sets of relative pronouns. One is for people and another for things. So when we refer to people, we use who, whom, or whose. When we refer to things, we use the word that and whose, or of which. So these are important words. Now in German, we use other types of pronouns. And these pronouns are ones you already know. Der, die, das. So let's take a look at an example. This example here. Wie heißt der Mann, der gestern hier war? What is the name of the man who was here yesterday? Notice it's der Mann and der gestern hier war. The word der is the relative pronoun that represents der Mann. Let's look at one more example. Wo ist der Brief, der heute Morgen ankam? Wo ist der Brief? Okay, where is the letter? Der heute Morgen ankam. That came in this morning. The word der is referring back to der Brief. Now, sometimes, depending on the role that that relative pronoun plays in the clause, will determine whether it's a der or den or dame, which any of those other words that we've learned before, it can change. Let me show you a couple of examples. Das ist der Mann, der gestern hier war. Der is the subject of the relative clause, meaning in this relative clause, der is the subject. But if I were to say, das ist der Mann, den ich meine means who I am meaning. So I am meaning to reference that person, der Mann, and den is then the accusative. So you notice it's a little bit different and it's depending on the role. I always think of it like roles in a play. If you're in a play, then sometimes you play one role and sometimes you play the other. You're still important to the overall play and you're still related to the play, but you play a different role. So let's take a second here and we're going to look at this chart. This chart should look somewhat familiar. Your German teacher probably has this chart floating around somewhere in their room, and it shows the way that der, die, and das all change depending on the different case. All right, first example. Hier ist ein Buch, blank, mich interessiert. We know that Buch is das Buch. So it says, hier ist ein Buch, das mich interessiert. Here's a book that interests me. Let's look at a second example. Kennst du die Leute, okay, blank, heute Abend kommen? All right, so do you know the people? We want to say who are coming tonight. So let's look back at die Leute, which is plural. So kennst du die Leute, die heute Abend kommen? Very good. One more example, and then I'm going to give you a shot. Die Suppe, blank, so gut war, steht nicht mehr auf der Karte. So the soup, we want to say that was so good, is no longer on the menu. All right, die Suppe, look up here. Die, so gut war, steht nicht mehr auf der Karte. All right, so now I'm going to put up a few more and have you practice on your own. So the second one that we're going to be doing is we are going to learn about what happens when the relative clause is going to be in the accusative case. Or I should say relative pronoun is in the accusative case. So we're going to look at this line here for accusative. So, first example. Das war eine Nacht, blank, ich nie vergessen werde. Okay, that was a night that I never will forget. So in this case, die Nacht is now going to be used in the accusative case. Lucky for us, it doesn't change. So we would say, das war eine Nacht, die ich nie vergessen werde. A second example is, das ist das Haus, blank, wir kaufen wollte. Okay, that is the house that we wanted to buy. So in this case again, the das does not change. It stays das wir kaufen wollten. So I'm going to put up a couple more examples and see if you can do it on your own. Now for our last examples, we are going to be working with the dative case. Now, if you don't know about the dative case, it's the indirect object. And there's a couple ways that this happens, that it's used in these relative clauses. Oftentimes, it's used with dative prepositions like mit or von. Sometimes it's has to do with verbs that are also dative verbs. So let's try out a couple of examples and see where we can get to. So the first example, das Zimmer in blank ich wohne ist viel zu klein. So the room in which I live is much too small. Now that word in, and the fact that you are in the room, it implies that it's dative. So I would say, das Zimmer in dem ich wohne ist viel zu klein. For the second example, die Familie bei blank wohnt spricht nur Deutsch. So I want to say the family with whom he lives only speak German. That word bei is a dative preposition. So you would look at the die Familie and the relative pronoun would be in the dative case. So it would be die Familie bei der wohnt spricht nur Deutsch. So I'm going to go ahead and put up a couple of exercises and see how well you can do.